So I'm Lua Wishes, and my guest today is Omkari Williams. Omkari is the author of the Gold Nautilus award-winning micro-activism, How You Can Make a Difference in the World Without a Bullhorn. She's a sought-after speaker, talking to audiences around the country about bringing a micro-activist lens to their work of change-making. On her podcast, Stepping into Truth, she interviews activists working in areas as diverse as farming while black, reproductive rights, and ocean health. A native of Manhattan, she now lives in Western Massachusetts. So welcome, Omkari. So glad that
Thank,
you're here with me.
thank you so much, Laura. I'm really happy to be here. This is lovely. I'm glad we were able to make it work.
Yeah, so microactivism. Would you tell us a bit about that? What is
Yeah,
microactivism? And
it's basically exactly what it sounds like. It's activism made really tiny because I think that too often when we think of activism, we think about big, grand gestures and we think about people like Greta Thunberg or Martin Luther King Jr. And while those people are certainly activists, that's not who most of us are. Most of us are not going to dedicate our entire lives to a particular cause. At the same time, there are things that most of us care really deeply about, and microactivism allows us to engage with those things without it becoming our entire life's work. So you don't have to abandon your puppies and your children and your partner and go off and do your thing. You can do your thing, whatever that is, exactly where you are in the time that you have, with the capacity that you have. And basically, I'm saying tiny actions matter and don't go comparing yourself to other people. Do you? Do what you can do. There are 8 billion people on the planet. If everyone did something in service of the greater good, we would be living in a very different world.
beautiful. Look, I remember when we were talking about your book, and I said to you, look, I don't consider myself an activist. And your response was, yeah, I know you don't, but you are. So that's one thing I really loved about your book, really talking about the different types of activists and the different roles and how many there are.
Yeah, because everyone's not going to feel comfortable doing the same thing. And it's a good thing because if we all wanted to be on stage, how would anything get done? And if no one was willing to speak out about something, how would people know it was a problem? So we need everybody. We need people who span the spectrum from those on the stage to those way behind the scenes whom we are never going to know their names or faces, but everyone counts. And I think that in a society where we tend to put value on your public profile, that I'm sort of pushing against that and saying you don't have to have a huge public profile to make a meaningful difference in the world. You can make a meaningful difference and no one outside of your immediate community may ever know your name.
Would you say a bit more about the particular types that you speak
Sure.
about in your book? Yeah.
Yeah, so there are what I call 4 activist archetypes. And I come from, I started my working life as an actor, so I tend to think of things through a lens of film or theater. And so the archetypes kind of came to me like pieces of a film set. So you have the headliner, and that would be the equivalent of your movie star, so George Clooney or whomever. And they are the person who takes center stage. And they are the person who will stand up there and speak about your cause. And they're super important. But like movie stars, there aren't that many of them. And the same is true in the activist world. Next, you have the producer who fulfills the same role in activist work as a producer on a film. On a film set, a producer is the person who looks at everything that needs to be done and figures out how to make all the moving pieces fit together. Then you have the organizer, and the organizer is the person who the producer says, I need someone to be in charge of food, so that's going to be your job. Because anyone who's ever worked on a movie set knows that if there is no food, there is no film. You never make a film without lots of food and coffee. So that's the organizer. They have a specific task that they are assigned, and they then figure out how to make that task come to fruition. And lastly, you have the indispensables. And to me, the indispensables are like the background players in a movie. Without them, unless you're making a movie about two people, it's weird to not have people in the background. You have the people walking down the street and the people in the office, et cetera, et cetera. The indispensables in the activist archetype sense are the people who are in the office. They're making the coffee. They're making sure there's toilet paper in the bathroom. They're making sure people have maps for the marching route. They're getting the permits. They're doing all of these things way in the background that are completely important, but without any public recognition. And that's the way they like it. They would not really want to be center stage at all. They're quite happy doing their job way in the background and just being an important part of the machine. So those are the four archetypes, and everyone has a place in there. Everyone can find themselves in one or more of those archetypes.
I love the way that your cat, when you were talking about those in the background, was like giving a big yes.
It's like, here I am, I'm in the background.
As someone who cares deeply about our world, what are your current thoughts or considerations? Like, where's your energy or attention going at the moment about our world and about being human in these times?
So when I was a little girl, I'm going to say I was maybe 12, there was this one day I said to my dad, I'm so bored. And my father said, there's an old Chinese curse, and it goes like this: may you live in interesting times. And I feel like, oh, okay, it is way too interesting right now. What would I give for a little boredom? A lot. I mean, yes. And so it's a particularly challenging time. I'm in the United States. So we are 9 weeks away from an incredibly significant presidential election. And not just for the United States, but honestly, because what happens here doesn't stay here. This election is just incredibly important for the entire world. Democracy is this very fragile experiment, and we're coming to understand that in a way that I think we didn't before. So that's where my focus is right now, because no democracy, everything else becomes moot. If we can't vote, if we can't apply pressure to our elected officials, then everything has to change. And I'm not saying that things don't need to change anyway. I believe they do. But I believe that this is still the best system that we have at the moment. And we can't just walk away and say, oh, let's just hand Donald Trump the keys to the White House and keep our fingers crossed. Typically, I would say, if you'd asked me this question, a year ago, or 6 months ago, I would say reproductive justice is a really important thing for me, because I don't know how people live lives of dignity if they don't have control over their own bodies. And the repercussions are so many across so many different areas. Everything kind of impacts everything else. So it depends on the moment. At this moment, my focus is the election. And if things go the way I sincerely hope they will go and the way I'm working for them to go and other people are working for them to go, then I'll be able to turn my focus back to reproductive justice, the situation in Palestine, the situation in Sudan, and other things that I really care about. But right now, I'm pretty much mono-focused on making sure that that convicted felon doesn't actually wind up in the White House again.
I noticed, I'd love to hear some more about your thoughts or how you take care of yourself amongst all that's going on. And
Yeah.
I was just reading again your book about the idea of self-care and versus collective care and who we are together.
Yeah. It's funny, when I wrote the book and I interviewed the various activists, including you, I asked everybody about their self-care, and it was the single question that I asked that I got the most pushback on, because self-care has kind of become this thing that is not what I meant by the question and is not what I believe it should be. And sort of, I'm not talking about mani-pedis, although I love a pedicure and I will never say no to one, but I don't consider that really to be self-care. I said that to someone and she said, yeah, no, that's just grooming. And I thought, yeah, that's right. For me, self-care is whatever one needs to do to be able to stay in the fight, whatever the fight you're in is. It's what builds resilience. It's what builds your capacity. And it depends on your temperament. I mean, I'm really an introvert. So for me, self-care is time alone and reading a book or, binging something on Netflix or something like that. Getting outside and just taking a walk and looking at the mountains and the clouds. That for me is self-care. For friends of mine, self-care is hanging out with other people, but that's not self-care for me. So everybody needs to figure it out for themselves, but it's the things that when you do them, you genuinely feel better. You genuinely feel restored. So, I mean, maybe it's something that costs money, but it doesn't have to be. Maybe it's something that involves other people, but that depends on your temperament. But I think whatever it is, it's super important because the world is hard right now. The world is hard. It is infuriating and frustrating and unjust and undignified. And that's a lot. So finding the ways to restore yourself so that you can get back in the fight, that's really important. And sometimes that honestly means just checking out for a few days. I mean, there were a few days this summer where I just thought, I can't. I didn't go on social media. I didn't watch the news. I didn't pick up a newspaper. I just checked out entirely. I figured if something happens, someone will call and tell me. And sure enough, I was sitting on my sofa on a Sunday afternoon when I get a text from my oldest friend, and the text is one word, and the word is wow. And I text her back and I say, wow, what? Thinking a little explanation would be helpful. And she said, Joe Biden just dropped out of the race. And I thought, see, it proved my point. When I needed to know something, someone was going to for sure show me the thing I needed to know. So we can check out. Someone will tell you when you need to know something. You don't have to be there every moment. You need to step back and take care of yourself.
Beautiful. This brings me to mind the point about going. You talk about going deep with just one or two issues, rather than trying to do everything and perhaps ending up doing nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually part of self-care too, isn't it? Just that
It
focus.
is. I mean, you know, the world, there are so many things that need our attention, but we're just one person, each of us. And we can't put our attention everywhere because then we're not really making any progress and we're just feeling fractured and just like, what am I even doing? Whereas if we pick one or at most two areas to focus on at any given point, then we can generate more momentum. We can create a habit. And it doesn't mean you're wedded to the thing. You know, as I said, I was really focused on reproductive justice, but now because of this upcoming election, I've shifted my focus for the next 9 weeks. And this is my focus. And once we're through this, no matter who wins, I'm going back to my focus on reproductive justice. You know, it's not like the cause is going to go away in the 9 weeks or the 3 months or whatever it is that I'm putting my attention on something else, if only. But that's not going to happen. It will still be an issue 9 weeks from now. So it's on the shelf because I have limited time and limited energy. And so I'm choosing to focus more acutely. And that's what I think that really all of us should do. And then lastly, as I said before, there are 8 billion people on the planet. So no matter what your cause is, someone else is also working on that. So you don't have to feel like it's all on you. It's never all on just one of us. You know, there is that collective, whether we know those people or not. The people who care about the same things that we care about are part of our community. We just haven't met them yet necessarily. So I think that there is a freedom that comes with understanding that it's not all on any one of us, and we can take a break and then come back to the work. The point is, make sure you come back to the work.
You mentioned community. What is that to you, and where do you find community?
Well, you know, as I said, I'm an introvert, so community is different for me than it probably is for an extrovert. My community is probably smaller than an extrovert's community would be. But these are people, my community are people, some of whom I've known since I was a teenager, and some of whom I've never met in person. We've become friends over Zoom. And we share commitments, and one of the commitments we share is to support one another. And so even though our areas of concern may not be exactly the same, they overlap and they intersect. And these are the people who I can put ideas in front of and say, what do you think of this? Where are the holes? What am I missing here? And they can do the same. But they're also the people who, when I'm getting burnt out, will say, I think you need to take a break. And they're the people who, when I'm taking a break, will say, I think you need to get back to work if it's going on for too long, right? So it's really about people I trust, people who I can be honest with, and we share common values. We don't necessarily share opinions, but we share common values. And people who know that I have their back and I know that they have mine. That's community for me.
Yeah, beautiful. We've had a big time in Australia over the last year, particularly with a referendum around recognising Indigenous people in the Constitution and giving a voice to Parliament through that. And I was really interested in what you were saying about the ideas of responsibility, we're in a colonized country, where we have a past with a lot of horrors and more in it. And I was really interested in what you wrote about the difference between taking responsibility and blame.
Mm.
And
Yeah, those are different things, you know. I mean, the way I describe it is this. There's here in the United States in particular, there's no one alive now who had a hand in creating the system of slavery. There is no one alive. However, that doesn't mean that people alive today have not benefited from the legacy of that system. And even people who have been burdened by the legacy of that system, we all have a responsibility to do the repair that is necessary, even though we're not to blame for the system existing in the first place. Because, you know, sometimes people say, well, you know, why should I do X, Y, or Z? You know, I didn't have slaves. It's like, no, but you have a generational wealth that people who are descendants of enslaved people do not have. And that is a benefit of the system of slavery. And I think that humans in general have a hard time taking responsibility. You know, we want to say, well, so-and-so did it, you know, Billy did it over there, look over there, don't look over here. And I think that if we're not intentional, that kind of follows us into adulthood. And that one of the challenges of adulthood and social justice work is knowing where we are responsible and where we are not, and understanding what responsibility, what that confers upon us in terms of moving us to action and what we need to do to make better a system that we had no hand in creating. But we're living in it, and we are to some degree or another benefiting from it or suffering under it. And finding that place of, I'm not going to say equality, that place of dignity for everyone. That's our responsibility. People should be able to live lives of dignity that have nothing to do with what they look like or where they're from or anything. It just should, dignity should be the right of all living things, including non-human living things.
Thank you. And Omkari, you also have some wonderful words about legacy. And I really love this idea of, you know, choosing, when making decisions, do I want this to be part of the legacy, of my legacy? So I'm wondering, well, if there's anything more you'd like to say about that, but also, what would you like your legacy? What, you know, if you can sum it up, I know that's a big question.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that's important is that I look at legacy as something we build each day. I don't just look at it as, you know, the things you leave to your heirs in your will or something like that. I mean, I think of it more just like, how do you talk to the person in the grocery store at the checkout aisle? Do you make eye contact with the unhoused person that you see in your community and acknowledge their humanity? You know, those are legacy building things, right? They may not be tangible things, but they matter. We remember how people make us feel, and we remember feeling seen. We remember feeling invisible. And so I think that if we shift our thinking about legacy to a more human scale, a more moment-to-moment scale, that it would inform our decisions, and we would do some things very differently because we wouldn't want this thing to be our legacy, right? We wouldn't want being snippy with someone for not something trivial to be our legacy. So we might be snippy, but we'd apologize, and we'd be sincere in the apology. So when I think about the legacy that I want for myself, a lot of it has to do with the work that I do. I would love to leave a legacy of micro-activism as something that people around the world think of as part of their life, just the way you brush your teeth. You know, it's like you brush your teeth on the regular, you do your regular micro-activism, and it's just part of how you move through the world. And then I have two little nephews. They are almost 4 and almost 2 years old. And I want to leave the world better for them. You know, some days I have no idea what that might look like, but it still informs my decision making. It's like, is this a better choice than that? Then we're going to go with the better choice, even if it's not the perfect choice. Because how often do we get perfect? And I'm not going to let myself get into paralysis over perfect. I'm going to keep moving forward. So when I think of legacy, I think about how do I want people to feel about having spent time with me or interacted with me, since I don't actually have anything to leave anybody. So I'm not going to worry about the stuff. I'm going to put attention on the feelings and the experiences.
Yeah. And what would you like to say to those young people coming into adulthood at the moment? Is there some message that you'd like to give particularly to them?
You know, when I was on my book tour, I actually got asked that question a lot. I was kind of surprised. And every single time I said the same thing to start, which is, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry because my generation has done a really terrible job of managing the world. And we're leaving you a lot to clean up that you shouldn't have to even be thinking about cleaning up. And I'm sorry for that, because we had opportunities to do better and we let them go by. And so there's more of a burden on you, and that is deeply unfortunate, and it is what it is. Both things are true. And I have immense faith in young people. I have immense faith in their inherent goodness and their passion and their concern for this world. So I look at it as sort of, well, it's kind of terrible what we've done, but look at how amazing these kids are. They will be able to make a huge impact. So what I'd like to say really is, I am really sorry. And I have complete faith in the ability of this coming generation to make the world an infinitely better place than it is right now.
Thank you so much for speaking with me today. I'm wondering if there's any last message you have for the listeners here.
I think the last thing I would want to say is, don't underestimate your importance. You know, we rarely get to experience how our efforts impact people, but they do. For each of us, there is someone in our lives who made a huge impact and we never told them. It might have been a teacher or a librarian, or there's someone, and we never told them. We didn't have the context, we didn't have the language, whatever, but we still think of that person and think of how much of a difference they made. And I just want to say that each of us is that person for someone, and to honor that and to appreciate that and appreciate yourself, and that the work you are doing does matter. It does matter. And don't question that. Just live in that certainty and keep doing the work, and do it with joy.
Beautiful. And how can people get in touch with you?
You can go to my website, which is omkariwilliams.com, and look around. There's a lot of information there. I have a bunch of resources. You can take the activist archetype quiz there. And yeah, that's the best place. And if you need to contact me more specifically for something, there's a contact form there as well. And I love hearing from people, so feel free to shoot me an email and tell me what you're doing in the world of micro-activism. Yeah, it's all good.
I'll add all those details too as well in a written form.
Thank you, Laura.
So Omkari, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your brilliance and your presence with us.
Oh, okay. Thank you really for having me. This was fun.